The knock on my door wasn't just loud, it was aggressive, like someone trying to break through rather than announce their presence. When I opened it, there stood Margaret Winters, our HOA president, her fist twisted in a scowl that could curdle milk before I could even say. She thrust a manila envelope into my chest with such force that I stumbled backward. Violation notice. She spat out, her voice dripping with satisfaction. You have 72 hours to comply. We'll begin eviction proceedings. I stared at the envelope, then back at her. Eviction for what? Your fence, she said, gesturing wildly toward my backyard. That monstrosity you painted, it's completely unicapult and violates HOA Code Section 12.3. I'd spent the last 3 months renovating me house since moving into Pine Ridge Estates. The fence had been the final project, a simple coat of slate gray paint to match my home's exterior trim. It looked professional, clean, and completely reasonable, at least I thought so. It's gray, I said slowly, as if explaining colors to a child. A neutral gray that matches my house. It's not approved beige. Margaret's voice rose to a near shriek. All fences in Pine Ridge must be painted in approved beige shade number 274. This is clearly stated in our bylaws. I held up a hand. Can you show me? That's written. I read through the bylaws when I moved in, and I don't remember seeing specific fence colors mentioned. Her face turned an interesting shade of purple. Are you questioning my authority? I've been HOA president for 8 years. I know the rules. I'm simply asking to see the written rule, I replied calmly. You have a copy of the bylaw, Shandy, she huffed and puffed like a cartoon villain. The office is closed today, but trust me, it's there. You have 72 hours to repaint that fence beige or the consequence with that. She spun on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing in my doorway with an envelope. I hadn't even opened yet. Little did Margaret know, she'd just picked a fight with someone who had spent 15 years as a compliance officer, a Fortune 500 company. If there wasn't thing, I knew it was how to read regulations and how to spot when someone was making them up. The next morning, I submitted a formal request to the HOA office for a complete copy of the current bylaws, specifically highlighting any regulations regarding fence colors. Response I received from Margaret's assistant, a nervous woman named Linda, was telling Mrs. Winter says the bylaws are currently being updated and aren't available for distribution. Linda whispered over the phone, as if Margaret might be listening. That's interesting, I said, because state law requires HOAs to provide bylaws within 5 business days of a homeowner's request. Should I file a complaint with the state HOA oversight board? There was a long pause. Let me see what I can do, Linda stammered. Hanging up 2 days later, he received a poorly photocopied document that looked like it had been run through a fax machine from 1995. Sure enough, there was a section about fence colors, handwritten in the margin with different ink. The edition was dated just 1 week ago. Retroactive. I effected immediately. I wasn't the only one dealing with Margaret's rain afterroar at the mailbox cluster. I struck up a conversation with my neighbor, Chen, who lived 3 houses down. She fined me $500 for having my trash cans visible from the street for 10 minutes after pickup, he said, shaking his head, then threatened to put Alina in my house when I contested it. Another neighbor, Sarah Martinez, had a similar story. My daughter drew hopscotch squares on our driveway with chalk. Marguerite called it vandalism and treated to find us when I pointed out that chalk washes away with rain. She added a neural banning all temporary markings and drivewayas. The pattern was becoming clear. Margaret targeted newer residencianger families and anyone who dared question her authority. But what really got my attention was when Robert mentioned the HOA's financials. Have you ever seen the budget reports? He speed claim we have no money for playground repairs, but our dues keep increasing. Where's all that money going? That question sent me down a rabbit hole thought would ultimately be Margaret's undoing. I spent the next 2 weeks conducting what I like to call a friendly investigation. This included requesting 5 years of home meeting minutes, financial statements, and enforcement records. When the HOA office had dragged their feet, I cited state transparency laws that required them to provide these documents. What I found was shocking. Even by HOA standards, the meeting minutes showed votes passing with margins that didn't match the number of attendees listed. Financial reports had line items for miscellaneous expenses that had ballooned from $20,000 to $20,000 annually. Most damning were the enforcement tractees. 90% of all fines and violations in the past 3 years had been issued to homes purchased after 2020. I created a detailed spreadsheet cross-reference and violations with home purchase dates available from public accords and enforcement outcomes. The pattern of discrimination was clear as day, but I needed more than patterns and needed proof of actual wrongdoing. That proof came from an unexpected source. Linda, Margaret's assistant, called me on evening from her personal phone. I can't take it anymore, she said, her voice shaking. What she's doing isn't right. She made me backdate documents, forgy homeowner signatures on compliance letters. I have copies of everything we met at a coffee shop outside. Then a boarhood where Linda handed me a thumb drive that contained the smoking gun. Not only were there forged documents, but there were also emails between Margaret and other board members discussing how to encourage certain indesirable elements to move out through selective enforcement their wherein-wazes for personal expenses. Chargetto, the HOA, including Margaret's Vacati Hawaii, labeled as a property management conference. Most incredibly, there was evidence that Margaret had been taking kickbacks from the landscape company, the HOA, used inflating invoice and pocketing the difference. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars over several years. Armed with evidence, I compiled everything in TOA. Comprehensive report, 120 pages. Documentation, complete with exhibits, cross-references, and a clear timeline of fraudulent activities. I didn't just want Margaret removed, I wanted the entire corrupt system exposed. I submitted their report to 3 entities simultaneously: State HOA, Regulatory Board, the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal fraud charges, and every homeowner in Pine Ridge Estates. The last part was crucial. I wanted everyone to know exactly what had been happening. Under their noses, the response was swift, brutal. Within 48 hours, investigators from the State Board arrived at the HOA office. They seized computers, filing cabinets, and boxes of documents. Margaret tried to prevent them from entering, actually attempting to block the door with her body, while screaming about private property rights. "This is a witch hunt," she shrieked, as investigators get out box after box. "That man with his ugly fence is trying to destroy our community values." The other board members quickly distanced themselves from Margaret, but the investigation revealed they were all complicit to varying degrees. The vice president, Tom Bradley, had been rubber stamping Margaret's stations without reading them. The treasurer, Janet Phillips, had been signing off on fraudulent financial without actually reviewing the books. The investigation moved at lightning speed, likely because the evidence was so overwhelming and well documented. Within 2 weeks, the state board called an emergency meeting at our community center. The room was packed with homeowners, many clutching copies of fines and violations they'd received over the years. The lead investigator, a nonsense woman named Patricia Walsh, didn't mince words. After reviewing extensive documentation and conducting interviews, we found systematic fraud, embezzlement, and discrimination by the Pine Ridge Estates HOA board effective immediately. The entire board is suspended pending criminal investigations. Room erupted in a mixture of gasps and applause. Margaret, sitting in the front row, shot to her feet. "You can't do this," she screamed. "I've given 8 years off me life to this community that fence is still in violation." And Patras fixed her with a steely gaze. "Winters, I'd advise you to remain silent and contact an attorney. You're facing potential charges of embezzlement, fraud, and violation of fair housing laws." Criminal side moved just as quick. Live district attorney, after reviewing evidence, filed charges against Margaret for embezzlement and fraud. Theater board members faced lesser charge but were still in serious legal troubles. Kickback scheme alone involved over $60,000 diverted from HOA funds during Margaret's arraignment. The judge set bail at $50,000 and ordered her to have no contact with any Pine Ridge Estates residents. The prosecutor outlined vet charges: 15 counts of embezzlement, 22 counts of fraud, and 3 counts of falsifying official documents. "I've convicted on all counts." Margaret faced up to 12 years in prison and fined exceeding $200,000, but the immediate consequences were just as satisfying. Every single fine and violation issued in the past 3 years was voided by the state board. The HOA's finances were placed under state supervision. A special election was called to elect a new board with strict oversight measures in place. As for my fence, during that packed community thing, Patricia made a point of addressing it directly, the alleged fence color violation that started this investigation. "There's no legitimate ruler fence colors in your actual bylaws. Mr. Davidson's fence is perfectly compliant. In fact, it looks quite nice." Room burst into laughter and couldn't help but smile. Margaret's face went from purple to white to red in the span of seconds. 3 months later, justice was served. Margaret pleaded guilty to counts of embezzlement and fraud in exchange for dropping the other charges. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison with 2 years suspend.